Hello, I'm JD Short, and you're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com. We're coming to you today on location from Willis Music Superstore in Florence, Kentucky, with our special guest, J.D. Short. What's up, J.D.?
Not a whole lot. Just love being here at Willis.
It's quite the candy store for musicians, isn't it? Well, I want to talk to you about the bass you're holding and Stonefield and some other stuff, but let's work up to that. I know you're originally from the Midwest and you've lived in a lot of areas and you've done a lot of cool stuff, but set the stage for us here. Tell us a little bit about your musical upbringing and how you were first exposed to music and how you became a bass player.
All the way back to first exposure to music. My mother, grandmother, both played piano. My first actual real sort of non-paying but paid in food gig was I was in a gospel quartet. I was a bass player for a gospel quartet with my grandparents, who bought me my first bass. Helped me buy my first amp. My dad bought me my first bass, but
what was your first bass?
It was a PV Fury, 4-string. It was the black with a white pickguard, but my dad special ordered a black pickguard, so I had to wait a couple weeks to get that in. So it was black on black PV Fury. Still have pieces of it somewhere. I take them all apart and build them. So it was we would just go around and do Southern gospel, gospel quartet stuff. And I was playing revivals and things like that. So basically playing potlucks, and that was probably junior high school. And then from then just started I was in a few bands, regionally successful bands, originally from Southern Indiana. So quite familiar with Cincinnati, played a lot of the great clubs here that are no more, like Sedzi Malone's my favorite. I miss it. It was great because it was in a laundromat, so you could so if you're on the road, it was perfect because you could do laundry while you're you're playing your show.
Practical.
It was like this mythical place we all used to love playing. Sedzi Malone, so just kind of playing.
I get to see you driving on the way to the gig. I gotta go home. Why? I forgot my laundry.
Yeah, it was always that. We were like, we need to play Cincinnati midway through a tour because then you could do laundry and you only had to pack half as much. And so we would, just sort of throughout the Midwest, playing in a few different bands here and there. Went to university at Indiana University, another wonderful Midwestern school with
great music school.
Amazing music school. I'm biased, but the best. And sort of that. And then I moved out to California and kind of started doing my own thing then, but I was out there and I worked building guitars and basses at Rickenbacker for a while, and then started kind of playing my own stuff, moved to New Zealand, which is, as we know, Stonefield's from New Zealand, so there's a little kismet there. And then,
did you know about Stonefield when you moved?
No.
I mean, most people don't just pick up and move to New Zealand.
Yeah,
What's the story there?
I was another part of my life was I do sort of arts consultancies, and I was there. There was a performing arts center that was converting to this software, and so I was there, just sort of kind of in a consultancy role and sort of IT role, sort of doing that, and then I still do that to this day, and then moved back to the States, and then at that point I kind of started writing my own stuff, and along the way I did composition and things at university, and so it was now I mostly do my own solo bass stuff where I compose and play all the parts, and then I'll have backing tracks, or for my earlier albums I could play the synth parts and the bass parts, but then I got too involved with the bass part, so it's hard to do all of it live. But for local stuff, or if I'm purposely planning it, I do kind of bring more equipment out there because I love any bit of equipment, and if I get to play synths and basses and other stuff, then even better for me. So
I know my website is called forBassPlayersOnly.com, but I can't stop thinking about New Zealand. Is it as beautiful as, what was it, Lord of the Rings, right? Yeah. Those all 3 movies were filmed there?
Yeah. It is.
Was that what you saw when you looked out your back window?
It's exactly what I saw. Basically, it's more beautiful than you can imagine if you've never been. And the thing I love about it is sort of wherever you are, especially the southern half of the South Island, but wherever you are, you drive for 30 minutes and the scenery is completely different, completely different topography. So you'll be in rolling hills and then within like 10, 15 minutes, it's craggy. It's some of the newest earth on Earth, like some of the newest land, and it's just this. Everything shifts, and I remember there's a like central part of the South Island, which is where they filmed a lot of they filmed Isengard, like in the Remarkables. Now, Remarkables is a mountain range, and we were driving, and you're just kind of looking, and you're just like, well, anyone could have made this movie. Like, it just looks like that,
Wow.
So it's stunning, and the New Zealand Tourism Board is not paying me to say this, but everyone I meet is just like, go. If it's on people's bucket list, but they should cash in and go do it because it's amazing.
It's on my list. Yeah. Let's talk about what you're holding there. Yeah. That is a Stonefield bass. Yeah. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this is my F Series bass, and so the F Series sort of it's not really entry line, but it's one of the production models that they have. So these are made in India. I like it. It's got a bolt-on neck, sort of simplified electronics. I really love the electronics, but we'll probably come to this. There's outboard units for those as well. I really fell in love with Stonefield basses just from like the form factor and the way how comfortable they feel while you're playing it, and just a lot of the innovation that's coming about, like really with the core focus on like proper timbers, real wood, like building everything from the ground up and then adding on all this stuff, but just making everything be about tone and playability, and then then all the other stuff comes into play, but it's a real, like, for me it's as an artist, like, it's a real like workhorse for what I can do what I want it to do. It sounds how I want it to sound. It's got really clear, distinct low end, but also it's not a sizzly bright top end either. So it sort of like fits with like my sort of musical voice and what I would dial out of most other basses I have or play.
And Tom Stanley, Tom with two M's, the founder of Stonebridge, a very creative, very passionate, and very, very sharp guy.
Yeah.
And he puts everything he's got into his instruments, and the end result speaks for itself.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, I absolutely love them. I'm around, and like I love all basses, like from my first PV Fury, like through everything else. Just and there's something about the Stonefields that's just kind of connected with me. And like initially, like where I first saw him was at the bass guitar show in
London.
In London, yeah.
I think that's where you and I met.
That's where we met, yeah, a couple years ago. And
Freak Bass was there too.
Freak Bass was there too. And we just happened. Freak and I were actually walking over to a string stand to just say hey to people, and we walked by and like they're still unboxing everything, and I said, like, oh look, they're from New Zealand. Like I should say hey, because it's New Zealand. You don't see that very often, and so that's one thing led to another kind of thing where then Freak and I were chatting and everyone chatting, and Freak has a signature series. I'm a Stonefield artist now too, and I sort of it's just amazing how the world works sometimes.
You use some of the electronics also, right?
Yeah. So
I mean, a pedal.
Yeah, it's in prototype form now, but there's a passive voicing unit. So there's a tabletop or rack mount version potentially, and then there's a pedal which basically takes a lot of the advanced electronics that are in like the C and M series Stonefields and sort of gives you the flexibility. So like the M series, which is the flagship Stonefield models, have just a ton of passive. Everything's passive, but you have a lot of tonal flexibility because there's a bunch of basically like mid filters that kind of come into play and just really like completely change the tonality of the basses. And that was one of the things I sort of fell in love with when I first sat down to play them, because I was like, if I'm doing studio stuff or if I'm doing something where someone sends me tracks and I send them 4 or 5 different bass tracks, like I'll play the same thing but kind of give them slight tonal variations or play it on a couple different basses. This to me, like, it kind of gave me that feeling of like, oh, I could basically play the same thing, click the mid-range switch, and it feels like another bass, or it like maybe that sits in the vision of your mix better, or maybe something like that. So like for me that was great. But when Tom came out with these models, I fell in love with the whole, like, this feels like more like working class kind of thing. So it's a more like, like players, it's not necessarily like for the high end artists. It's more like, yeah, you can, this is your first serious bass. You could, like step up to a Stonefield as your first serious bass. And then and then so add on some of the bits. So like right now, this bass, we'll get this later, doesn't have the Tom Stanley tuning system on it, like the tailpiece. It will by this time tomorrow. But yeah, watch this space. But you can sort of retrofit and kind of add up to this. So like basically at that point, you can even swap the necks, and I'm basically up to like the G series, and then kind of move it. So you can kind of like work your way into it if there are things that you don't. Like some people don't, it takes a while to get used to the tuning system.
Yeah,
this is just standard like 4-peg, it's just, neck through or string through body and 4 pegs. But the tuning system where you have the fine tuners like you would see on like an upright or, violin kind of thing, having those, like, I've gotten used to having that now, and it's like, oh, that would be great to have. And so we're going to retrofit this bass, my bass, with that tuning system. But I really wanted to have this like accessible. It's like it's an accessible Stonefield for someone, and like it's every time I go play with this bass, because people are still hearing about Stonefield, and everyone's just like that. Everyone's blown away by this bass, and so it's just kind of like. I really like having it.
I remember when that tuning system came out, we did write a story about that on ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Very innovative. What's keeping you busy these days, JD? What are you doing with all that bass stuff?
Mostly it's my own solo stuff, which is Bass Doubler, which is spelled BASSDBLER because no one will ever find it. Otherwise, I have that name since the early days of the internet. Didn't realize you should just spell out the words. And a lot of with that,
you can get the other domain and have it redirect to.
I do have that too, but yeah, I spent that money. But it's so I have my own solo stuff where it's basically I do all the backing tracks and do like composition, playing with that, and all of that. Like I'll say is like it's all based around like the Dune books, and so a lot of times I'll get there's a decent fan base just from that alone, that like there's a lot of Dune fans like out there that just will pick up stuff or like message me, and so like that's keeping me busy, like writing and doing shows here and there. A lot of times for those shows, like it's just one-off fly dates. Fortunately for my frequent flyer miles, unfortunately for me, it's most popular in like Germany, France, and Brazil, as is you're never famous in your backyard kind of thing, or as a bass player. And, so it's just, that's keeping me busy. I do a lot of film scoring and really a lot of stuff for like web shorts and stuff that comes up, or podcasts, and just doing that. A lot of like pilot work. So it's just a lot of like keep the creative juices going, and just kind of like, and that was sort of my whole thing, is like composition and thinking of bass as like it's just an instrument. Like I don't play bass as a traditional bass player mostly. I mean, I do if I'm just like in context, but if I'm left on my own, then it's not good for anyone. So.
What about the future? Is there something else that you've always wanted to do that you just haven't gotten around to yet?
I mean, future stuff would be really. Mostly getting back into like a lot of jazz playing, so like.
That's right. You play double bass. You play upright.
I play upright as well. Like I've done, like you did a lot of like big band kind of stuff, like big band and like avant-garde jazz. So not a lot of like middle ground, Right. But like I just, one of my passions is that, and like classical stuff. But like for me, like because I write everything, like I get to do all of those types of playing like whenever I feel like it. And but yeah, just sort of like that's kind of thing I'd like to do, is like actually join a group again and have like play with like more people, because like the solo stuff's great, but it like the whole thing is like being supportive, being like part of like a collective sort of thing. So I would like to probably do something like that, a few little talks about things kind of happening, maybe a big string of shows happening in the UK this fall. Not sure if that's going to happen. We'll see. Like some, as is everything, like some of that stuff. But that's the.
Be sure to let us know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Last question, JD.
Yeah.
What would you be if you weren't a bass player or a film scorer or any kind of musician? Something outside of music.
Outside of music, well, the closest thing besides music that I've ever been would probably teach martial arts at one of the excellent institutions of University of California, Los Angeles, or Indiana University, which have the two largest martial arts programs outside of West Point.
What area of martial arts?
Primarily Hapkido is my main one. Also do a specific version of Filipino Arnis Eskrima, which is Hiron Arnis Eskrima, which was founded by this man, Leo Hiron, who fought in World War II. Actually, the first Filipino infantry fought with, they did bladed combat on the islands because the whole point was to not be caught. So it's sort of like battle tested Eskrima. So like all this stuff I do is like actual like real world kind of example stuff. So
I did not know all that about you.
I usually don't tell people because it's a better surprise.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised. Well, keep us posted on any and all of that stuff. And I think we should have a follow-up interview, and I think we should do it together in New Zealand. Are you down with that?
I am absolutely down with that. Yes. We should make that happen.
Okay. Well, let's work on that. Yeah. On location from the Willis Music Superstore in Florence, Kentucky, with our good friend of many talents, J.D. Short. I'm John Liebman. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.